Okay, so we are reviewing the 10 questions on the logic statements, the conditional statements that we had on the worksheet. They ask us to find the converse, inverse, or contrapositive of the following statements. Before we do that, let's remember that our conditional statement is P to Q. The inverse statement is the negation of P to Q. So basically, it's the opposite of P to Q. So we're saying if the conditional is P to Q, the inverse is not P, then not Q. The converse is the switching of P and Q. So if it's P to Q, then it's Q to P. And the contrapositive is both. It's kind of like the combination of the inverse and converse, where you're switching and negating. So you notice it's Q to P and they're being negated. One of the students said that a good way to look at it is like cause and effect. Well, P and Q is the cause and effect. The inverse is negating. You're saying the opposite of the cause and effect. The converse, you're switching back and you're switching places, the cause and effect. And the contrapositive, you're switching places and you're negating the cause and effect. Let's take a look at number one. Number one, it says, what is the converse of the following statement? If today is Monday, if today is Sunday, then tomorrow is Monday. I'm going to put the hypothesis in yellow, or the cause, and then the conclusion in blue, the effect. So this is my P and this is my Q. Well, they're asking for the converse. And remember that with the converse, if your conditional is P to Q, the converse, you're just switching them. So then my answer is going to be, if tomorrow is Monday, notice how that comes first. If tomorrow is Monday, then today is Sunday. So this is the converse. This is the converse of my conditional statement.
Miss Blottinger, can you please call the main office?
Number two, they want the converse of this statement. Hypothesis, if Joe goes fishing, then he needs bait. This is the P and this is the Q. Again, they're asking for the converse. So with the converse, we just switch the hypothesis and the conclusion. So it's if he needs bait, then Joe goes fishing, or Joe went fishing. All we did was switch them. This is my P to Q, so the converse is just Q to P. Number three, what is the converse of the following statement? If a triangle is equilateral, then it is isosceles. Then the triangle is isosceles. Well, this is my P, this is my Q. The converse, remember the converse, if the conditional is always P to Q, the converse is the switching. You're switching them, so it's Q to P. So my answer is going to be then, if a triangle is isosceles, then a triangle is equilateral. So far for the converse, all we have to do is switch the hypothesis and the conclusion. However, some of you guys, when I checked your assignment, just kept doing that to all of them, and you forgot to read the instructions. For number four, they're asking us for the inverse. They're asking us for the inverse. And if you remember, the inverse is the negation, or the opposite of my P to Q. My not P to not Q. So we're not switching places with the P to Q, we're just negating them, and that's the inverse. So they tell us that if two segments are congruent, that's my hypothesis, then the two segments have the same length. That's my conclusion. And the two segments have the same length. Well, if you look at the answers, if the two segments are congruent, look at the new hypothesis. If the two segments are what? Not congruent, then the two segments do not have the same length. So notice that for the inverse, yellow to blue, P to Q, it didn't change. What did change? Well, we added a word. We added the word what? Not. If two segments are congruent, the negation of that is if two segments are not congruent. then the two segments have the same length. Well, the negation of that is then the two segments do not have the same length. And that is for the inverse. Let's take a look at number 5. They want to know what the inverse is of if a triangle is scalene, then no two angles are congruent. Again, they want the inverse. So am I going to switch my P and Q? No, I'm just going to negate them. Notice that the inverse is just negation P, negation Q. So what's the negation of if a triangle is scalene? Well then, the negation would be if a triangle is not scalene. And what's the negation of then no two angles are congruent? Well, the negation is then any two angles are congruent. And that would be my inverse. The P to Q, the order of P and Q didn't change, but they were negated. The conclusion says then no two angles are congruent. What's the opposite of no two angles being congruent? Then any two angles are congruent. Number 6 was the easiest one. My hypothesis is if 4x is equal to 8, then x is equal to 2. Well, the inverse is the negation. If 4x is not equal to 8, then x is not equal to 2. Not equal to 2. This is the inverse. This is the inverse. Number 7. They tell us the Greeks used different types of columns in their architecture: Doric, Ionic, Corinthian. These columns are classified by their capitals or tops. Okay, so they gave us a prompt. Then they ask us, what is the inverse of the following statement? Well, again, my hypothesis is if a column has a scrolled capital, then it is an Ionic column. Well, they want the negation of that. The inverse is just the negation. Negation P, not P to not Q.
Miss Guerriere, can you please come to the main office? Miss Guerriere, please come to the main office.
So, if I look here, what's the negation if a column has a scrolled capital? Well then, if a column does not have a scrolled capital, okay, and what's the negation of the conclusion? Then it is not an Ionic column. Then it is not an Ionic column. That is the negation. Now, this is the correct answer. However, on the EOC or on one of my examinations, you might see an answer that looks more like this. That's not this choice. I'm not saying this is the right choice. This is a good choice. But if they don't show you a choice like this, that means that there's another choice, and it'll probably look like this. Well, if a column has a scrolled capital, what's the inverse of that? If a column does not have a scrolled capital. Okay, so that's pretty easy. But then there's a reason they gave me all of this up here. They told me that there are 3 types: Doric, Ionic, and Corinthian. Well, then the inverse of its Ionic is that it is what? Is that it is not Ionic. Well, let me ask you a question. If it's not Ionic, then what is it? Well, then it has to be one of the other choices, and it'll look like this. If a column does not have a scrolled capital, notice this is my inverse, right, of statement. It does not have a scrolled capital. Okay, well then logically, then it is what? Then it is a Doric or Corinthian, and that is the meaning of logic, guys. Then it is Doric or Corinthian. Again, if you put this as your answer, that's correct. But you can only come to the logical conclusion then that if it's not Ionic, then what is it? Then it is Doric or what? Or Corinthian. Then it is Doric or Corinthian. And this will be one of the choices that they have on the examination. Let's take a look at number 8. Number 8, they're asking for the contrapositive. You're asking for the contrapositive. Remember that the contrapositive, you're switching your P and Q, and you're negating them, and you're saying the opposite. So let's take a look here. If a figure is a rectangle, then it has four sides. So if a figure is a rectangle, then the figure has four sides. Okay? Well, the contrapositive means that they're going to switch those and they're going to negate them. Well, let's negate them first. Let me ask you a question. What's the opposite of if a figure is a rectangle? Well, then it would be a figure is not a rectangle. And what is the opposite if the figure has four sides? Then it would be what? The figure does not have four sides. So when we look here, my contrapositive is going to be if a figure does not have four sides, then it is what? Not a rectangle, just like we said. It is the inverse, but then they are also switched. And notice the keywords are what? Not and not. Let's take a look at number 9. What is the contrapositive of the following statement? If a triangle has at least two congruent sides, then the triangle is an isosceles triangle. Well, let's negate this first one. What's the opposite of if a triangle has at least two congruent sides? What's the opposite? Well, then it would be the triangle does not have at least two congruent sides. And what's the opposite of it being an isosceles triangle? Well, then you would say that it is not an isosceles triangle. But we're talking about the contrapositive. So not only are we negating them, but we're also switching the order. We're also switching the order. So my answer would look like this. If it is not an isosceles triangle, see, I switched, and with the word not, then the triangle does not have at least two congruent sides. Does not. So again, yellow to blue, P to Q, yellow to blue, Q to P, blue to yellow, and with the words not in them. And number 10, what is a contrapositive of the following statement? If a movie was made before 1920, then it is a silent movie. Well, again, we're going to switch them and negate them. What's the opposite of the movie being before 1920? Well, the opposite was that it was not made before 1920. And what's the opposite of it being a silent movie? Well, then that it's not a silent movie, but it's the contrapositive. So we're going to switch them. So we're going to say, if it is not a silent movie, then the movie was not made before 1920. Was not made before 1920. So I switch them. This is my conditional statement. I switch them, and I also what? Not negated them. Now, there is something else that I want to mention. This is the right answer, but they might also give you another choice, and that other choice might look like this. There's another way to write the contrapositive of this statement. The contrapositive of this statement would also be if it is not a silent movie, then, well, and it's with the last part, then the movie was not made before 1920. The movie was not made before 1920. Well, what's another way of saying that the movie was not made before 1920? Well, then it would be then that the movie was made after 1920. If it was not made before 1920, then it must have been made what? After 1920. So if it is not a silent movie, then the movie was made